I'm Anne Gaviola. Welcome to the Peak on Global, where we break down what is trending in the business world and what you need to know to stay ahead of the curve. Joining me now is my co-host, Brett Chang from the Peak podcast. Welcome, Brett.
Hey, Anne, great to be with you.
Brett, let's start with this new report by Deloitte, which suggests Canada will enter a short technical recession by the end of this year. This is a kind of bad news, good news scenario because experts at Deloitte say a tight labor market and a big savings cushion that a lot of people and some businesses have accumulated during the pandemic are going to help to soften the blow. What do you make of all this, Brett?
Well, not to discount Deloitte's research and their economists, but we really don't know what's going to happen. This is a really strange time. Usually with a recession, what you see is a combination of economic decline, so kind of month over month decline in economic growth, while simultaneously a labor market that becomes increasingly open and expansive. And so you have high unemployment. We're just not seeing that right now. So this combination of a tight labor market, but with the markets in decline, you really start to think that this is something that we haven't seen before. And so I think Deloitte's guess on this is as good as anyone's.
Yeah, you cite this. We haven't seen this before. I think I can't even count the number of times during this pandemic that we've said this is unprecedented. So yes, this recession may be unlike others that we've seen before. I remember as a child and even as a young adult and to this day, seeing and feeling that when it came to recessions, the most palpable tension was around what recessions tend to do to jobs. So that is whether that's at home with my parents worried about unemployment or among colleagues and just generally people in the workforce. I think it's really important to note that the people over at Deloitte are expecting a muted impact on jobs this time around. So it may be a recession in terms of what GDP is doing, but it may not feel or behave like a typical recession. There's a term that economists have been bandying about, calling it an inventory recession, which is kind of different, right?
Yeah, and that's the best case scenario here. You're absolutely right, Anne, which is that, we expect to have an economic decline, and that would be what a recession is. But if we can keep the labor market tight and we continue to have high employment, that's a great outcome for families, which really is what matters here. Ultimately, if you look back at 2008 and 2009 and the great financial crisis, what you just saw was the worst possible scenario where markets were in decline while at the same time there was massive unemployment, and that really hits home. And so the combination of having a tight labor market, plus, I think this is important that people do have increased savings from the pandemic. They weren't spending as much over these past 2 years. That probably should help. But I can't reiterate enough that there's a lot going on in the world right now. We're going to talk about something else going on in the next segment. And so I don't want people to get too complacent in that this might be, we might get out of this scot-free. There's a lot going on in the world right now, and it only takes one event to really shake things up.
Absolutely. And although many or the majority of households and businesses may have that savings cushion, it is important to note that some do not and have come out of, this whole thing that we've all been through over the last couple of years plus in worse financial shape. There's a little bit of a segue here. Speaking of recessions, our second topic, Britain isn't in one yet, according to the latest stats, but it is flirting with an economic downturn. Investors didn't like the new British government's decision to institute its largest tax cut in 50 years while boosting spending and borrowing, while inflation over there rages at a 40-year high. Now, Citibank analysts have called it a huge unfunded gamble for the UK economy, critics taking aim at an approach that, quite frankly, it smacks of trickle-down economics. What do you think, Brett?
So what's interesting is that Prime Minister Liz Truss, only 2 weeks into the job, and her Chancellor of the Exchequer, their finance minister, they have put forward this agenda, which it looks a lot like what we used to see back in the 80s and 90s with both President Reagan and Prime Minister Thatcher, as you mentioned, called trickle-down economics. And the idea behind it is that if you lower taxes and ease up regulations, you will create an explosion in economic activity that they think would help battle against what they expect to be economic decline over the next few quarters. So the challenge is that the markets looked at that and they thought, well, we're already experiencing really high inflation right now. And the last thing that we need is more money being pumped into the economy. And so the tax hikes, which were record breaking, we haven't seen tax hikes like that in the past 2 decades. Those tax hikes are going to pump more money into the economy, and that's going to make inflation even worse in the UK. And so as a result, the pound, the British currency, it just tanked that day because the markets are just really skeptical of the plan being put forward by Prime Minister Truss.
Yeah, and when you talk about that tax cut, where is that money going? I think that is sort of central to all of this. The Truss government's mini budget was accused of boosting bankers' bonuses and giving corporations a pile of cash, all while framing it as something that would help ordinary people. We know that recessions widen that gap between the rich and just about everyone else. We also know that the UK is the most unequal major economy in Europe. This is a real head scratcher for me, Brett.
Well, I think what is most interesting about this is that usually politicians want to shy away from that type of behavior, the appearance that they're working for corporate interests. And so the fact that they removed the cap on bank bonuses, I thought was pretty shocking politically. But the other kind of interesting component about it is that you would expect that the markets would be supportive of efforts to encourage business and increase profits. But even in this case, they just thought it was a step too far. It was too far for even them. And I think that really speaks to the failure of the plan so far. Now, they aren't moving on it. Prime Minister Truss has reiterated that she intends to stand by the budget, the mini budget that they've put forward, and make it happen. But we'll have to see what happens, because the polls show that currently her government is down about 30 points, which would be catastrophic for the Conservative Party in the UK.
Yeah, we'll be watching the happenings across the pond very closely over the next few weeks and few months. Now, I want to switch gears a little bit, because our final topic is a real bright spot in a world of decidedly dreary headlines recently. I certainly feel that. The Peak has reached a significant milestone, 100,000 subscribers in a little over a year in existence. Congratulations to you and your small but mighty team, Brett. It truly does take a village.
Yeah, absolutely. And we couldn't have done it without having just such a great team that was so focused on hitting this goal. We made it our top priority for the year, and we actually got it done in advance of when we originally planned to. We hope to get it done by the end of September. We got it done a few days before. And so it's been quite the journey. We're truly honored that so many people wake up with us and give us 5-10 minutes of their day. And so, yeah, we're deeply grateful for everyone, and deeply grateful for the team for making this happen. So, but thank you for mentioning it, Anne.
Absolutely. I can't wait to celebrate this milestone with you and the team next week and meet some people in person. I'm pretty stoked about that. Thank you so much. Congrats on this milestone, but thanks as always for your time and your insight.
Thanks, Anne. Have a great weekend.
You bet. And you can get all your daily business news with the Peak Daily Podcast. It's available for free on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever you find your favorite podcasts.